All right, here we go again. Mike Sutton back. And as I said in our last one, this is the continuation of my collaboration with the amazing Miss Dena Breslin. Are you still with me, Dena?
I am.
All
I
right,
am.
there we go. And so we started last time talking about the self talk, and we talked about building your awareness around the self talk that you've got, becoming aware of what it means, listening to it, starting to identify whose voice it is and what it's telling you, and then being able to reflect on that so that we can start to you think about, is it working for us? Is it working against us? What's the dynamic here? And so then the thing that we're going to go move to now is the structure and truth behind self-talk. So the truth of the self-talk, I feel like I have some thoughts on. I'm more curious about the structure of the self-talk. So set that up for us.
So what we were talking about before with regard to, my God, how many thoughts we have in any given moment and any given hour and any given day. It's very difficult to even uh, be clear on structure of thought until you actually get it out of your mind. So in whatever way, for example, if you write it, you were talking about doing it on a whiteboard. So data dumping or brain dumping or mind mapping, whichever, we've heard a lot of these different formats, but that truly is really an important part of this whole thing. Very difficult to do it just by keeping it between your ears. So getting it out is really important because what it allows you to do is to see it for what it truly is and understand what parts of those things are really you, what parts of those things are really not you.
And so how do we want to do that? Like what uh, so what you're saying is that our self-talk has some structure to it and it
Yep,
will be useful to us to figure out what that is.
correct. It
Okay.
has
So what's that look like?
so there's like you even mentioned, for example, you can chunk it down to money, for example, if that's where you feel like you're stuck. Let's say you're a great, I mean, I'm sure you are, an awesome dad, great husband, but this particular, some of us are stuck in just a particular area rather than stuck in general. There are many, many people out there who are stuck overall. And what I find interesting is, and just as a little aside, is people will hire me to help them be unstuck in their business and they can't get out of their own personal way. So that's why I was saying to you earlier is that the number one relationship that I help people coach through is the one with their own self.
Yeah, I think
So
that's
in
very common to have, and even within business, a lot of times business owners will say, "Well, I have a sales problem, or I have a marketing problem, or I have a you know cash flow management problem," but they don't
correct,
see until you start digging into it that there's some bigger issues at play here than just this one little area.
right? Well, but it's a great start. So not to mitigate the fact that they may identify the cash flow as an issue, let's data dump on that. Let's draw it out. Let's develop the blueprint for what it really is going on in their brain. So then once that happens, and um, I love to go back to the thought that because of my training is in medicine, right? As a physician assistant, my training has allowed me to diagnose a problem from a patient coming in telling me a story. So once you tease it out, and in this format, you and I are teasing it out with our clients, potentially on paper, and you did it with yourself on a whiteboard. It's really critical to get the clear picture, to add the structure to it. What's the architecture of it? When does it happen? What are the triggers? And sort of to help it evolve so that you can see the picture clearly. Because if you don't see it clearly, it's really hard to get through it.
So are there like common structures that we're looking for, or what is like how are we going to use this tool?
Well, I just think it's keeping it very simple. I mean, like you could get elaborate, but there's really just getting it out, either verbalizing it, to the coach, writing. I think it helps to write it. Somebody needs to write it down. There's that connection in the brain when we actually crypt out something, when we write out something. So that's powerful. We kind of get away from it. It's okay to write and type, on our computers, but it's got to be where we can somehow mirror. It's got to mirror us in some way. So we look at it and it's a complete mirror to us, and then
So
we can help the client.
it's almost the case that recognize, looking for the structure, recognize that is kind of just a tool to help us build awareness around what's really going on here. That there is something, there is a reason for this. There is a structure to it. There's a method behind the madness. It's not just random background thoughts going on, and that's what we want to try to uncover.
Correct. And you've probably experienced this, Mike, where you'll have a client come over to you thinking they want money flow solutions. And ultimately, you could give them 5 million solutions to their money flow problem. And if without uncovering what the self-talk is, you're really just combating the fact that they're going to talk themselves out of potentially doing everything you've recommended because you're not a consultant.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point. What does that reveal? What's that tell us?
That tells us that the self-talk is the kernel, if you will. It's the kernel, the source of them being stuck. And until we as coaches or until we self-regulate or identify it ourselves, it's going to be very challenging to band-aid it with action steps.
Okay. So does that lead us to truth? I mean, so it feels like the next question is like, if the, so it sounds like from what you just said that the self-talk is giving us just like the first piece of the puzzle, the surface layer, but then there's more there. So like what's really happening? How do we get to that?
So here's the combination. Once we're aware, right, that was our first thought. We need to be more and more aware of it, right? By slowing down and hearing it and asking who's speaking and what value does this have? Is this true to me, for me? Okay. The map, I'm telling you, it's so important. People, here's the other thing why I love what I do is because most people don't recognize patterns in their life. They don't put evidence together. They don't allow it to come together to give them an outcome. For example, you could ask this guy who came to you and he's saying it's money flow problems, right? And you might say to him, what's the evidence that tells you you have money flow problems? And many people cannot articulate that, for example. Or let's say building rapport is a big one. I have trouble because I can't really get people to do what I'm asking them to do. But ultimately, we know it's building rapport. Well, what's the self-talk? Well, what's the evidence that has led you to conclude X? What's the evidence that has led you to conclude? What's the truth? I like classic. Here's classic in sales. I can't seem to land a deal. Well, how many deals have you tried to land? Well, 2. Okay. Well, we know that it may take you 22 to actually land 2. Right? And so what's the truth of the whole pattern, of the whole storyline that they're telling themselves? So that plays into it, into self-talk as well.
And so I guess what I see coming together here is like we talk about structure and we talk about truth, not that there is a specific structure or there is a specific truth generally, but that we have to kind of map that out, what that looks like for us. Is that what we're getting at?
Well, sure. I mean, there's a facet in there of truth, not just of the evidence that we have seen in our lives, but what is it that we want to be? What do we want to be known for? What do we believe our strengths truly are? Or what do we believe, for example, I'm talking to a gal who's asking me to help her with her business, but here, meanwhile, she's struggling with her motherhood. So then we talk about, well, what do you believe that you're a good mother? Well, yes. Okay, so what's the evidence that you're a good mother? Again, building up the truth so that we can combat the bad self-talk, right? So if the bad self-talk says to her, you suck as a mom, or who do you think you are being a mom? Like, you're not really being a mom. You can't hold it together. Your daughter's 4 and she's still not potty trained, like different things like that. But then if I can help her identify what the truth is based on the evidence that she truly believes, it's so much easier than to combat that old story.
So as you're talking through this, the picture I'm getting is that it's kind of like, and we're on both sides of this, but it's kind of like arguing with somebody, but you don't really know what their point is. You just know what their argument is. And so you got to kind of reverse engineer their argument to figure out what it is that they're trying to say in the first place. So we're hearing all this self-talk saying, no, that's not right, but it's not telling us what is right.
Do you mean us as a coach or us as a person?
So I'm saying I've got me, and then I've got my self-talk that's constantly yelling in my ear, and that voice is trying to make some argument to me that
right?
I don't understand.
Okay,
And so I need to reverse engineer the structure to get to the truth of what's behind that argument that this voice is trying to make to me.
correct, correct. Got it. It's a lot of, it's a lot of uncovering, like digging. That's why in Shrek, do you remember when Donkey says to Shrek about the layers of the onion?
Yeah.
Our job, is
Ogres
to.
have lots of layers.
That's right. And people who are stuck are like ogres with lots of layers, right? And so we
Yeah.
we help peel away, and we can do this for ourselves once we, you know. Let me tell you a little bit about coaching. I don't believe coaching is like, ad nauseum. I don't believe coaching has to be for years and years and years. I believe that a good coach can work with someone for a few cycles, a few months, and really teach them the tools to uncover their self, more awareness, just like what we're talking about, build the structure of truth, right? What's really true here, and be more confident in the conversation it has back to the bad voice. And they can start to do that on their own. Everybody can do that on their own.
Yeah, and I love that. I think you're absolutely right. And to me, what's at the core of that is that we are really all born with a full emotional toolbox. We have all
Yep,
the tools we need:
that's
anger,
right.
sorrow, disappointment, joy, desire, all these things, fear, whatever it is. We just don't learn how to use them right all the time. And that's what we're talking about, is going back to figure out, yeah, there's a place for anger, but you're applying it to everybody that comes into your life. How do we learn to use that tool correctly? Or,
Right.
whatever the case is that's
Correct.
revealed by the self-talk.
Wait, I just mentioned something because this is a really good point. Is that so often we'll take that anger and stuff it. How many people do we know stuff, stuff, stuff? I am very confident in saying that that is why we are obese. That is why we have disease. Stuffing stuff hurts our cells internally. It's not really meant that those toxins are not really meant to go through the liver and the kidneys. Those are mental toxins that we are stuffing. And sadly, rather than being aware of them and working through them, sadly, that's kind of where people end up along the way when they stuff those emotions. Like anger is not a bad thing once we recognize that it's there and what kind of purpose does it have. Well, it can be fuel for change rather than being stuffed.
And stuffing it down doesn't make it go away, and it doesn't hide it. And I think that's we tell ourselves that, like, well, I don't want anybody to see it, so I'm just going to hide it. But we, as people, humans, are incredibly well adept at communicating emotion, whether we want to or not. Other people see that. They're picking up on it. And that's what it feels like when we say, I don't know, people just don't respond to me the way I want them to. And I'm just not closing sales the way I want. And my marketing is just not connecting with people. It's all this other noise that we're communicating along with what we're trying to say that's confusing it.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. So to wrap this episode up, the structure and truth behind the self-talk, like that, the truth is what we're trying to get to, and we use the structure as a tool to kind of unveil that, because when we hear it, it comes into us, and we don't necessarily know what it's trying to say or why it's trying to say it or what it's trying to get us to do. And so we look at the structure, we use the awareness and reflection to kind of dig back to what that truth is that it's trying to give us.
I love what you said about reverse engineering. It truly is slowing down long enough to say, where is this coming from and what's the full picture? And really, how true is that statement anymore?
And what we're getting at here, which we're going to talk about in our next wrap up episode, is that there is something that's at the core of that. It is trying to serve us in some way, and that it's putting us in a situation where we're not getting necessarily what we want, kind of reveals what we're working towards, which is we want to be happy and successful and fulfilled and loved and engaged and all these other things. And if we're not getting that, that conflict is what we're trying to dig towards underneath all this, right?
Well, right. It's a clue in and of itself. It is a clue.
Right. So then in our wrap up, we're going to
Yeah.
answer the final question for everybody, in a sense, theoretically. What's at the center of all this?
We're launching them on a journey.
All right. I love it. Okay. So we're going to wrap this up, and you're going to hang around. We're going to record our third episode, but I am going to sign off here and say to all the people I hope you enjoyed it. I love doing these kinds of episodes. I get such great energy from people like Dena, and I'm very grateful to have her on. So until you and I speak again, be the person you want to be, build the business you want to build, and have the successful life you want to have.